So we're going to talk about changing out the Serpentine belt or your accessories belt, depending on how you want to call it. It's located on the turbocharged engine. It's on the passenger side, and the tensioner is tucked way down in there and has a torque screw. You can see it right there. So the first thing you're going to want to do is end up jacking up the car. Just when you do, make sure that you set your parking brake and put chocks under your... So the tools you're going to need is a socket wrench with a E14, a little pry bar to help, a 5/8 socket for the engine mount, a piece of wood, a jack, and 2 jack stands. I'm using an air impact wrench. You don't need to use a pneumatic impact wrench, but the 5/8 socket is for the 3 bolts for the motor mount that we have to get the belt around. The piece of wood we're going to use on the oil pan below. So you have 2 choices on how to support the engine, one from above or the other is from below. I'm going to do this one from underneath with a piece of wood on the oil pan, and I'm just going to support it underneath while I loosen those bolts. If you see the engine start to drop, just give a few more pumps on the jack. So I've slid my piece of wood in between the oil pan and this nice little plastic plate here, making sure I'm off the exhaust. And I also make sure that I'm a little bit forward of the oil drain pan, the bolt for it, so I don't put any pressure on that. Next I'm going to do is jack up from the center of the oil pan, just put a little bit of weight on it, and then start loosening the engine bolts. I'm just taking off these 3 engine bolts from the engine mount. Again, I'm just using the impact wrench because it's quicker and easier. Right now the engine's free. It shifted about 1/4 of an inch downwards a little bit, but if we look, we are still lined up that I could rethread it at any time, but it's now separated enough. The next thing we're going to do is remove the air filter. Start by loosening up one of the 2 hose clamps, either or. I removed this one just so I have more room. Remove the sensor by pulling it back on the red tab, pushing down, and then it has a little clip on the side. You should be able to just lift up. It's held on by 2 little rubber grommets. I did forget to mention there's a hose down at the bottom of the airbox that you have to pull out. You just simply pull back, straight back on it, and this will all come out. That'll give us access to these 3 bolts, 1, 2, and 3 way back here. We need to remove those. It's just going to make it easier so we don't have to drop the engine completely down about 1.5 inches, putting strain on the other side of the mounts. So I've gone ahead and removed those bolts. If you're curious, they're also 5/8, the same as the 3 engine bolts here. This bracket will just lift up and remove out of the way. You can set it aside. And now we have an easy place for the belts to get around when we go to loosen it. So here's where you're going to need your external Torx and your little pry bar. I have to, because this is long, this is actually a piece off of my little portable generator, but it works perfectly for this. Slide it around. Alright, so you're going to be pulling towards the front of the car. So as soon as I do that, you can see the belt loosens up. And I take that opportunity to slide it right off the alternator, since that's the smallest pulley and it's right nearby. Just in case you can't see it in the video, I'm going to pull back on the pry bar towards me. You'll see the belt starts to loosen up right there. And I personally always like to slide it off right here, right at the alternator, just because that's the smallest and usually the closest place to the tensioner. But you can slide it off any one and then you should be able to release tension back off the pull. So I'm going to remove the belt again. Belt's off. I can let go on the tensioner. So it was hard to see in the video, but the belt kind of got caught up between the tensioner and the engine mount bracket, so I ended up putting my pipe back on, pulling back on the tensioner, and now you have the belt that you can easily replace with a Dayco or another brand. To put it back on, you do it in the same order. I have a feeling that the tensioner is going to be an issue getting this belt back on, so I'm going to go ahead and start there, because what happens was the tensioner is pushing against it. There's just not a lot of clearance between inside here to maneuver the belt around. So that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to put this belt back on. This is just a demonstration. This belt's actually in really good shape. I would hope so, as this engine only has about 7,000 miles on it at this present time. So I was wrong. I ended up having to remove this engine mount right here. It's 3 bolts that are also 5/8. You can easily loosen them while in there with a socket wrench. I was having too much of an issue trying to get the belt around into this area without removing that. If you remove that in the beginning, it'll make taking the belt off a little bit easier, as you can get your socket wrench into the tensioner a lot easier. The other thing I want to point out is if you have to replace the tensioner, this is its pivot point right here, this black Torx. That's not the one that you want to turn on when you're using your E14. You want to actually turn on the pulley itself. And this actually lets you get a little bit better leverage on the tensioner, so you can easily turn it that way. So I'm going to go ahead and put the new belt on. So I'm going to grab the belt, which happened to be sitting in front of me. Wrap it around on the turbo. It's a pretty simple pattern. The only real complex bend is around the bottom and around the tensioner. Just like when I was taking it off, I like to use the alternator to put it on. So right now the belt's wrapped completely around. It's just off a few little grooves, which is easy enough. So I'm just going to hold that there. Oh, my socket switched. Alright. Slide it over the alternator. And there we go. There's now a new belt, or a replacement. This one obviously was the one that was existing, as this is a new engine. This is just to show you how to do this, as there hasn't been done before. My next step is going to be to put that mount back on the actual physical engine first. So that's the 3 long, really long 5/8 bolts. Only one of them you'll be able to physically remove, which is this corner, while the mount is in place. The other 2, you kind of have to wiggle it out with them in there. So I'm going to put it back in the exact same way. I'm going to switch out for my 5/8 socket. I'm going to throw this back into place and just hand thread it in to start. Alright, got those all hand threaded, so now I'm just going to tighten them all up with a socket wrench, and then I will torque them down with a torque wrench a little bit later. So I've gone and torqued those all down. This is now secure. So the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and put the engine mount back in. Whoops. Helps if I set it in the correct way. And that's simply just going to rest in there. I'm going to drop the 2 bolts into place. Let them thread. Go ahead, thread my nut on there. And I'm going to go ahead and grab my impact wrench and just tighten those down with that, and then finish them off with a torque wrench as well. Alright, so those are down. I'm just going to hinge them with the socket. It's down. It's down. It's down. So the next thing we can do, while we're here, we can go ahead and drop our 3 engine mount bolts in. Again, I like to thread all 3 first. Now I'm going to go ahead and just use the impact wrench to bring them in, then I'll hand torque them after. One, 2, 3. I'm going to get my torque wrench in a second. Okay, I've torqued all these down. The next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and put the air filter back. Thing to remember is this needs to slide into a little plastic plate here. So you got to kind of go in at an angle. The wiring and stuff you see dangling off the front is my HID stuff. It's a tight fit. But once you get it in, there we go. That's in. I'm going to reconnect that one tiny hose, and that just pushes right in. Reconnect my air hose here. Spin the little hose clamp around. And tighten that. Last thing I'm going to do is lower the engine back in and take the jack stands out from underneath. And you should be good. Done. When I said done, I was wrong. I forgot one last thing is the mass airflow sensor right here. Just go ahead and push it in, slide the red clip down, and now you're done.